Ranger Sarah Morgan had never been one to put much stock in local legends. She'd spent her entire career working for the National Park Service, assigned to various outposts and stations where the lines between myth and truth often blurred. Over the years, she'd heard enough ghost stories around campfires to know how these tales grew in the telling. But something about the region she'd been recently assigned to, an isolated area near the Ridgeway mountain range, had a strange effect on her from the start. Locals would speak in hushed tones of an ancient presence hidden within the mountains, telling hair-raising stories about unearthly screams echoing through the twisting caverns. They claimed that the mountains housed a labyrinth of caves so immense they practically formed their own underworld, complete with hidden lakes, living walls and corridors that seemed to shift. Word of caution always ended their stories. No one who ventured too deeply ever came back quite the same. Sarah, who prided herself on her level-headed approach to just about everything, firmly believed these old tales were little more than local superstition. The region was known for having networks of caves, yes, and perhaps a few braver explorers had gone missing over the years. But Sarah chalked that up to poor equipment, lack of preparation, or accidents. After all, mountains and caves could be perilous places if you didn't respect their dangers. Despite her skepticism, the setting had a magnetism that was hard to ignore. The Ridgeway Range jutted out of the earth like the spine of some ancient beast, its peaks often shrouded in a permanent cloak of rolling fog. The weather here was mercurial bright sunshine one hour, sudden downpour the next. From the vantage of her station, Ranger Sarah could see the distant silhouette of sharp peaks cutting into the sky. She sometimes thought those mountains were watching her, but she dismissed it as an overactive imagination. That all changed one brisk autumn evening. The day had begun as any other. Sarah rose before dawn, brewed a pot of strong coffee, and checked her station's logbook. There were the usual routine matters: a hiker complaining about overgrown trails, a warning for potential rock slides in certain areas, and a few supply details for the weekend when more tourists were likely to pour in. She hopped into her jeep and set off to patrol her usual route, weaving through the forest roads that led around the base of the Ridgeway Range. The early morning air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp soil. The forest canopy glowed with autumn reds, oranges, and yellows. As she drove, she felt content, reassured by her own presence and the hum of the jeep's engine. She had no reason yet to fear those imposing mountains. Her day's responsibilities took her up and down well-trodden trails, chatting with the few hikers she encountered, making notes of fallen logs or potential hazards. By mid-afternoon, she'd pulled the jeep over near a scenic overlook and ate a quick lunch while scanning the ridgeline with her binoculars. She thought she saw movement far in the distance, near a rocky formation that was rumored to be riddled with dangerous caves. Curiosity piqued, Sarah hopped out of her jeep. She peered through the binoculars, trying to locate the source of that flicker of motion. But all she saw was the wind stirring the shrubs. Just as she was about to lower the binoculars, a cacophony of crows burst from the treetops, cawing wildly. Sarah frowned. It was quite late in the season for that many crows to be roosting together. Still, it wasn't unprecedented. As dusk began to settle, she decided to head back toward her station. Driving slowly along the uneven dirt path, her headlights cut through the early darkness. That was when it happened. A scream, high-pitched, almost human but twisted. Sarah slammed the brakes, heart pounding. The scream had come from somewhere ahead, or was it off to the side, deeper in the woods? She turned off the engine and stepped out, ears straining for another sound. The night was unnervingly silent for a long moment. Then the scream came again, echoing off the walls of a nearby rocky outcropping. It sounded agonized. Sarah's first thought was that maybe some reckless hiker had injured themselves. She grabbed her flashlight and radio, fully expecting to find someone in need of rescue. Yet when she ventured only a few yards from the road, the darkness of the forest swallowed her. The beam of her flashlight flickered over twisted tree trunks and jumbles of undergrowth. The night wind whistled, carrying a faint echo of that unholy scream. She called out, "Hello, is someone there?" No reply. Minutes passed, and Sarah scanned the area thoroughly but found no trace of an injured person or even an animal. Slowly, the tension bled from her muscles as she convinced herself it must have been an animal cry. Mountain lions sometimes let out blood-curdling calls that sounded eerily like a woman's scream. But that rationalization didn't ease the uneasy flutter in her stomach. Eventually, she decided to return to her jeep and finish the drive back to the station. She needed to log the incident at least. A part of her mind whispered, it might be more than a wildcat. But she shook it off. She wasn't going to let campfire stories about haunted caves creep into her professional judgment. That night, as Sarah settled down in her small quarters, sleep came fitfully. She dreamt of corridors carved into living rock, of voices weeping and wailing somewhere deep beneath the earth. She woke with a start to the sound of her radio crackling, only to find the station utterly silent. In the darkness, she lay there trying to steady her breathing, feeling uncharacteristically on edge. The next morning, she tried to mention the scream casually to a local she trusted, a man named Rory, who managed the visitors' centre. Rory was in his late 50s, a stocky man with a thick grey beard that matched his bushy eyebrows. He had lived in the area all his life and knew more about the local folklore than anyone else Sarah had met. When she told him about hearing a strange scream out near the Rocky Falls Trail, he gave her a weary, knowing look. "You've heard the mountain's voice, Ranger," he said. Sarah resisted the urge to roll her eyes, but the seriousness of Rory's expression gave her pause. "I'm sure it was just a wildcat or something, right?" Rory shook his head slowly. "Everyone says that at first. But there's something about those caves, Sarah. I've been hearing about them my entire life. The old folks used to speak of them as if they were alive. If you go in too far, they might never let you out." She tried to wave away the unease creeping along her spine. "It's just a series of tunnels, geological formations, and people's imaginations." "Maybe," he conceded, but there was a grim finality to his expression. "Just be careful if you decide to go poking around there. Scream or not, it's easy to get lost, and not everyone returns." With that, Rory excused himself to help a group of tourists, leaving Sarah uncertain whether she felt comforted or unsettled by his words. For the next few days, Sarah couldn't shake the memory of that terrible scream. Every time she walked the perimeter of her station at dusk, the memory seized her with an uneasy jolt, as though the mountain might roar again. She began to pore over old maps of the area, looking for any mention of extensive caverns. Sure enough, she found multiple markers indicating cave entrances near the base of the Ridgeway range. Many were labelled closed for safety or hazardous conditions. Others had no official designations at all, and lines of dotted trails ended abruptly at the foot of steep cliffs. One particular cave stood out to her, circled in faded ink with a note scrawled in the margin. Local rumour of unknown depth unexplored. On the 7th day after hearing the scream, Sarah's curiosity got the best of her. She decided to make the trek to that circled cave. She followed a narrow dirt path that wound through dense forest and rocky slopes. The air was cooler than usual, carrying an odd dampness that clung to her skin. At last she arrived at a rocky overhang that jutted from the mountain's base. A black maw opened beneath it like a hungry mouth waiting to swallow the unwary. The entrance was partially blocked by fallen boulders and thick hanging vines. Sarah's heart thumped with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. She'd never seen this cave on any official tourist maps, and its opening was far larger than she'd expected. She edged closer, shining her flashlight into the darkness. A cold current of air wafted out, carrying a musty odour reminiscent of damp stone and stagnant water. She thought she caught a whiff of something fouler, something like decaying vegetation, or worse, decaying flesh, but it was too faint to be sure. Sarah had come prepared with climbing gear, extra batteries, glow sticks, and an additional flashlight. The plan was not to venture too deep, just a cursory exploration. Maybe she'd snap a few photos, check for signs of animals, then head back and make a report about the cave's condition. She reassured herself that was all she intended to do. Yet a part of her, the same part that had believed local legends were nonsense, felt a pang of disquiet. She pushed the feeling aside, telling herself that caution and preparedness were enough to keep her safe. Duck-walking beneath the low-hanging entrance, she found herself in a narrow passage that sloped gently downward. The walls were slick with condensation, glistening under her flashlight's beam. Drip, drip. The steady sound of water droplets echoed, creating a rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate inside her skull. The passage soon opened into a wider chamber. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like the teeth of a sleeping beast, and her boots splashed in shallow pools of water collecting on the cave floor. She paused to mark her path with glow sticks at strategic intervals, ensuring she could easily find her way back. The orange glow of the sticks provided a comforting lifeline in the otherwise inky darkness. As she probed deeper, she noticed the walls began to change in texture. Initially, they had been rough limestone, but now she saw patterns as though someone or something had etched shapes and symbols into the stone. Most were indecipherable, spiraling lines and geometric figures that overlapped and converged in perplexing ways. A chill prickled up her spine, and she raised her camera to document them. Maybe these are ancient petroglyphs, she thought. It wasn't unheard of for early inhabitants to carve symbols, though the designs looked far more alien than the ones she'd studied in the region's archives. Tap, tap, tap. She froze, heartbeat thunderous in her ears. That sound wasn't the steady drip of water. It was too deliberate. She swept her flashlight across the chamber, revealing only the glimmer of wet rock. Nothing else moved or breathed. The air felt stifling, pressing in on her from all sides. Shrugging off her unease, she continued, reminding herself to remain rational. Perhaps water droplets were striking a stone at intervals, creating an odd resonance. But as she ventured further, the tapping persisted, always near enough to raise the hairs on the back of her neck, yet never close enough to be pinned down. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and she at last came to a fork in the cave. One corridor slanted sharply down, while another climbed upward, disappearing behind a bend. Just as she was considering which path to take, the scream tore through the air. It was the same unearthly wail she'd heard before, only this time it was amplified 100-fold by the enclosing stone walls. Instantly, adrenaline flooded her body. She felt her chest tighten, her palms go slick with sweat around the flashlight. She called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Her voice quivered despite her attempt at composure. The echoes bounced back, mocking her. No human reply, just silence pregnant with dread. Rationality warred with instinct. On one hand, if someone was genuinely hurt, she was morally obligated to help. On the other, venturing blindly into this subterranean maze could be deadly. Her training told her to proceed with extreme caution, but the pang in her conscience urged her forward. What if the screams were real? If they belonged to someone trapped or injured? With trembling resolve, Sarah chose the corridor leading downward. The deeper she descended, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air felt heavier, nearly suffocating in its dampness. The walls seemed to glisten with a faint luminescence now, as though algae or lichen clung to them. More unsettling still, the patterns carved into the stone grew more elaborate. What started as simple spirals now formed labyrinthine designs reminiscent of twisted, interwoven body parts. Sarah paused to run her fingers over one particularly intricate carving, feeling shallow grooves and ridges that nearly pulsed under her touch. Her flashlight caught a flicker in the corner of her eye. She turned, heart hammering, but found nothing there. Only darkness. This place feels alive, she thought. The notion was absurd. Caves were inanimate geological formations. Yet the deeper she traveled, the more she felt the walls themselves were breathing, or at least shifting with some hidden breath. The sensation was not unlike standing inside a vast creature's belly. She tried the radio, but only heard static. She wasn't surprised. She'd gone too far underground for any clear signal. Pressing on, she was startled by how the corridor began to subtly expand and contract, as if it were a giant throat swallowing her. She told herself it was her imagination combined with exhaustion. And then came the moans. At first she thought it was just the wind blowing through a crevice, but as she concentrated, she realized it was a chorus of guttural moans, a low hum that reverberated through the stone like a dirge. She followed the sound, each step feeling heavier than the last. Eventually she entered a massive cavern where the walls were covered with bizarre symbols. They glowed with a faint bioluminescence, bathing the space in a sickly green hue. Her eyes widened at the sight. The carvings formed an unearthly mural depicting twisted humanoid forms merging with the rock. Some figures looked like they had elongated limbs, while others seemed partially fused to the walls, their faces contorted in eternal agony. A wave of nausea hit her. She couldn't tell if she was hallucinating or if something truly unnatural was scrawled across these ancient stones. The moaning intensified, and she turned her flashlight upward. High overhead, near the cavern's ceiling, a cluster of jagged stalactites formed shapes that eerily resembled gaping mouths. It was as if the cave was hungry. Sarah's nerves were at a breaking point. Her rational mind screamed at her to leave, to retrace her steps and get out while she still could. She tore her gaze from the disturbing carvings and hurried back the way she'd come. She kept her eyes on the trail of glow sticks, those precious markers leading to safety. But before she could reach the point where the corridor forked, a deafening rumble shook the cave. She staggered against a wall, nearly dropping her flashlight. Her ears rang as chunks of stone crashed down, and a dense cloud of dust billowed up, choking her. When the quake subsided, she forced her watery eyes open and shone her flashlight into the corridor. It was blocked by fallen rock. The entrance she had come through was now completely sealed off. "No," she whispered, throat tightening in panic. She coughed, eyes stinging from the dust, and rushed to the barricade of boulders. She tried to move one, but it was far too large. The others were wedged tightly together. Even if she had a crowbar, it would be an enormous undertaking to clear the passage. She was trapped. Sarah leaned against the wall, fighting the rising tide of fear. Her breathing was ragged, and her heart pounded so loudly she was sure the entire cave must hear it. She grabbed her radio again, frantically trying to signal for help, but the static was unyielding. Summoning her training, she forced herself to calm down. "I need to find another way out." She recalled that this entire mountain range supposedly had a labyrinth of connected tunnels. If she could keep moving, maybe she'd find another exit, or at least a higher chamber where a signal might break through. She couldn't afford to stay still. Already the air felt stifling, and she had limited supplies. Driven by necessity, she turned away from the collapsed corridor and back toward the deeper sections. She dreaded returning to that chamber with its nightmarish carvings, but it was her only chance. As Sarah ventured deeper, each step became a battle against the overwhelming sense that the cave wanted her to keep going. The stone floor felt almost soft underfoot, as if layers of some fleshy membrane had grown over it. She shuddered at the thought. The moaning, meanwhile, grew louder, interspersed with the occasional shriek that made her blood run cold. Who or what was making these sounds? She tried not to dwell on it. Her job was to survive. She followed a sloping passage that curved ever downward. The labyrinth twisted, forking into multiple branches only to converge again. Several times she ventured down a passage, only to find it ended in a vertical drop too high to safely descend. Other times the route narrowed until she had to squeeze through claustrophobic crevices. The deeper she went, the more frequent the carved symbols became, covering almost every inch of rock. She began to notice patterns within the patterns, spirals within spirals. Some part of her mind swirled with half-formed theories about ancient civilizations, but the rest of her was too consumed by immediate survival to ponder archaeology. After a while, she found a corridor that gently rose, giving her a spark of hope that it might lead to an upper exit. She pushed forward, ignoring the dread pooling in her gut. The corridor led her to another wide chamber, this one with a natural stone bridge spanning a yawning chasm. She moved cautiously across the bridge, shining her flashlight down into the abyss. The beam barely pierced the darkness, revealing only a seemingly bottomless pit. Carefully, she made her way to the other side, feet sliding on loose gravel. When she reached the far end, she found more carvings, this time forming a bizarre archway. The rock was etched so deeply that it looked like an entrance shaped by cunning hands. There, on the threshold, she found something chilling, an old rusted ranger badge. Her breath caught in her throat as she crouched to examine it. The nameplate was too corroded to read, but it was unmistakably an official National Park Service badge from decades ago. She turned it over in her gloved hand, a jolt of horror electrifying her mind. Another ranger had been down here and had never emerged, judging by the presence of this lost emblem. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep going. If there was one, maybe there were others. Maybe they had left some clue or route for escaping. The archway beckoned, though stepping beneath it felt like walking into the maw of a nightmare. On the other side, the air was cold enough that she saw her breath. The moaning continued, but it was quieter here, as though muffled by layers of stone. The corridor ran straight for a time, then forked again. Feeling a sense of déjà vu, Sarah placed glow sticks carefully to mark her path. She wondered how many glow sticks she had left. She'd used quite a few already. As she advanced, the sensation that the cave was living and breathing intensified. She occasionally felt tremors beneath her boots, gentle undulations that seemed too rhythmic to be mere geological shifts. At times, she swore she heard a pulsing, almost like a heartbeat echoing from the walls. Eventually, she entered another cavern, this one smaller, with a ceiling that sloped downward in one corner. Cautiously, she scanned the area, her flashlight revealing a horrifying sight, a cluster of bones, partially buried in rubble. Her heart thundered. She stepped closer, using her boot to shift a few pieces of broken stone. Beneath them lay a skeletal arm, still clad in tattered cloth that might once have been a jacket. She saw the faint outline of a National Park Service patch. Her stomach lurched. "Oh God," she whispered. The occupant of that old badge was here, or at least what remained of them. Shaking, she looked around for any sign of identification or equipment. She found a battered old backpack against the far wall, half disintegrated. Digging through it, she uncovered a notebook wrapped in plastic. The pen was long gone, but the pages inside were still legible. She flipped to the first page, her flashlight illuminating a neat cursive script. Ranger Edward Barnes, Field Notes, December 1969. Sarah's eyes widened. She'd never heard of a Ranger Barnes. The station records didn't mention any disappearance from that era. She hurriedly read the scribbled entries. Day 1, found a cave near the Ridgeway summit. Locals warned me, didn't listen. Day 2, strange markings on walls. Heard moans. Possibly wind. Anxiety is high. Day 3, the walls, they shift when I'm not looking. The screams, not animals, something else. Day 4, entrance collapsed, trying to find another way out. Day 6, found bizarre archway, markings like nothing I've ever seen. The rock feels alive. Day 7, I hear voices. Sometimes I see figures in the dark, out of the corner of my eye. My radio is dead. Day 10, I'm losing track of time. This place breathes. I found the text here was blurred by water damage. Day 12. Something is following me. I see footprints in the mud. Hear it whisper my name. Day 14. Food is almost gone. Water is scarce. The screams are inside the walls. How? Day 16. This mountain is alive. It's feeding on us. The entry ended abruptly, the pen strokes trailing off into a messy scrawl. Sarah flipped further, but the rest of the notebook was unreadable, stained with mold and water damage. Sickened, she gently placed the notebook back in its plastic wrapping, tears stinging her eyes at the realization that this man had died alone in the darkness, his last days consumed by terror. Would that be her fate too, she wondered. She forced herself to stand, gaze flicking to the skeletal remains one more time. Then she turned to leave, a grim determination taking root in her. She would survive this. She would not become another set of bones lost in the living labyrinth. Continuing deeper, Sarah realized she had no idea how much time had passed since she entered the cave. Her watch was cracked from the collapse, the display frozen. She felt exhausted, but fear drove her on. She reached a tunnel where the floor sloped upward. Her spirits lifted. Maybe this led to a higher level or an exit. She began the climb, sliding on loose rubble. Partway up, the stone beneath her hand felt disturbingly warm and yielded slightly to her touch. She yanked her fingers away as though burned. Her flashlight revealed that the stone was discolored, a pulsing red hue running in veined patterns beneath the surface. She stared, transfixed and horrified, at the slow contraction and expansion of these veins. She pressed her ear to the wall and swore she heard a faint, steady thrum, a heartbeat. Revulsion coiled in her gut. She scrambled back, nearly slipping on the wet rock. A geological phenomenon. Her rational mind tried to provide an explanation, maybe some form of algae or microbial growth that reacted to heat or pressure. But a more primal part of her brain whispered that she was trespassing inside something far beyond natural understanding. Pressing on, she found the corridor had narrowed significantly. She had to turn sideways to fit, pushing past damp stone that felt more like slick flesh. The veins of red glow surrounded her, pulsing in that nauseating rhythm. She thought she heard hushed whispers, like the voices of the lost calling out from within the rock. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she wedged herself through a particularly tight stretch. Then something sharp grazed her cheek, drawing blood. She winced and hissed in pain, pressing a hand to the wound. Looking back, she saw that a jagged outcrop of stone had cut her. Crimson droplets splattered onto the living wall. An immediate reaction occurred. A tremor rippled through the corridor, as if the cave itself shuddered in excitement. The throbbing red veins grew brighter, and a wet, gurgling noise resonated from somewhere deep below. Sarah's heart pounded with renewed terror. It felt like the mountain was feasting on her blood. She stumbled forward, desperate to escape the claustrophobic passage. Finally, she emerged into a larger chamber and collapsed to her knees, sobbing for breath. The air was slightly more open, though just as cold and clammy. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the horrifying reality she'd just experienced. A new sound broke through her ragged breathing. It was the unmistakable wail she'd heard before, only this time it wasn't echoing from somewhere distant. It was close, very close. Sarah jolted upright, shining her flashlight frantically around the chamber. The scream came again, ear-splitting and raw. Her light fell upon a sight that froze her blood, a fissure in the wall, about the size of a human torso. From within that opening, 2 hands were clawing at the rock, as if someone was trapped inside the stone itself. The arms looked pale, with the skin stretched taut over bones. The fingernails were broken and bloody. The scream tore through the fissure again, and Sarah realized with dawning horror that someone or something was embedded in the wall, unable to free itself. She edged closer, though every instinct told her to run. The figure's face came into view, contorted in agony. The eyes were rolled back, and the mouth hung open in perpetual screaming. Tattered remnants of clothing clung to its torso. With trembling resolve, Sarah reached forward. "I'll help you," she whispered, though she had no idea how. She tried to wedge her hands between the stone and the figure, but the rock felt fused with flesh. The figure let out another shriek, voice ragged, then collapsed in on itself as if the mountain were drawing it deeper into the wall. Sarah let out a cry of panic, pulling back. The eyes of the figure flicked toward her for an instant, burning with desperation before the rock enveloped its face, a damp, slithering sound, and then silence. Sarah stumbled away, gasping. Adrenaline surged as she realized the truth of the local legends. The mountain was alive, devouring people who ventured too far. She needed to escape now, before it claimed her as well. Yet panic warred with logic. She needed a plan. She took a moment to look around, noticing that this chamber had multiple tunnels leading out in different directions. Each one looked like a dark throat. Don't pick the wrong one, she thought, because there may be no coming back. She systematically checked each tunnel, shining her flashlight down a few yards into the dark. Some sloped sharply downward, too risky. Others were blocked with rubble or narrowed to an impassable crawl space. Finally, she found one that seemed to maintain a level path. With a flicker of hope, she entered it. The walls here were less alive-looking, though the grotesque carvings remained. She hurried along, ignoring the moans and wet, slithering sounds emanating from the depths. At intervals, she thought she heard footsteps behind her, but whenever she turned, the corridor was empty. A faint glow drew her attention. She turned off her flashlight, letting her eyes adjust. The glow was coming from ahead, a pale greenish luminescence, similar to the earlier bioluminescence but brighter. She approached cautiously, finding a small alcove in the rock. Within it grew clusters of luminous mushrooms, their caps pulsing softly. Cautiously hopeful, Sarah recognized that fungal growth sometimes thrived near underground water sources. If she was lucky, there might be a natural spring further ahead. She was running low on water, and dehydration was a real threat. Pressing on, she followed the faint glow of the mushrooms until the tunnel opened into a broad cavern with a small subterranean lake. The water was dark, reflecting the eerie green glow from the fungal forest that clung to the walls and ceiling. The air here was icy cold, but fresh enough that Sarah wondered if there was a hidden vent or crack leading to the outside. She knelt by the water's edge, shining her flashlight to see if it was clear. She spotted her own reflection, disheveled hair, pallid skin, and haunted eyes. Gently, she scooped a small amount of water into her mouth. It tasted metallic, but she was too thirsty to be choosy. For a few moments she allowed herself to rest, listening to the dripping of water and the soft hum of distant moans. She checked her supplies. The battery on her flashlight was half gone, and she had only a few glow sticks left. No food remained, except a single energy bar. She stared at the dark water. Could I swim across? She wondered. But the far shore was obscured by shadows, and there was no telling what lurked below. With a resigned sigh, she decided to circle the lake, scanning the cavern walls for any potential exit. To her dismay, the shore offered no obvious paths. The walls rose smoothly with no crevices big enough for a person to pass through. At the far end of the lake, she noticed a small opening high up near the ceiling, perhaps an air vent. But it was unreachable without climbing gear and likely too narrow for a human to crawl through. Despair threatened to swallow her. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, echoing the monstrous thrum she sensed in the walls. Just as she was about to leave the cavern and backtrack, she heard a faint voice calling her name. Sarah. Her blood ran cold. The voice seemed to come from the darkness on the far side of the lake. Heart pounding, she aimed her flashlight in that direction. At first, she saw nothing but black water and stone. Then, movement. A figure emerged from a shadowy alcove, a person. Sarah couldn't see their features clearly, but they wore what looked like a Park Service uniform. "Help me," the figure croaked. Hope surged within her. She splashed through the shallow edge of the lake, ignoring the freezing temperature, shining her beam onto the figure's face. She recognized him from a photo she'd seen in old station archives, Ranger Edward Barnes. The very same name from the notebook, but that was impossible. Barnes had gone missing over 50 years ago. Sarah's mind reeled. She wanted to dismiss it as a trick of the shadows, a hallucination brought on by stress. But then he stepped forward, revealing a face drawn and pale, cheeks sunken, eyes wide with terror. "Barnes?" she asked, voice trembling. He nodded slowly, as though each movement required great effort. "Been trapped so long," he rasped. She stepped closer, the water now up to her knees. "How?" "I found your remains." The words caught in her throat. "Impossible." "I found your bones." She thought of the skeleton in that upper chamber, wearing the tattered uniform, the half-decayed notebook. But this man was here, calling her name, reaching out a trembling hand. A new wave of dread crashed over her. What if this was some kind of spectre, a manifestation of the cave's malevolent power? She remembered the moment she saw that person embedded in the wall, screaming and clawing at the stone. Perhaps the mountain could absorb its victims, or replicate them, or keep them in a state between life and death. She backed away instinctively. Barnes, or whatever wore his face, gave a pitiful moan, stepping into the light. His clothes were partially fused to his skin, the fabric melded with flesh. Where his arm emerged from the shirt, the texture was wrong, almost stony. "Don't leave me," he pleaded, voice cracking. Sarah's instinct screamed that this was a trap. As she watched in horror, part of Barnes's chest rippled, the outline of twisted veins visible beneath his uniform. The same red glow pulsed there faintly. He reached a hand toward her, but she stepped back, stumbling on the slippery rocks. I'm sorry," she whispered. She turned and fled, pushing through the water, boots struggling against the slick lake bed. Behind her, Barnes let out a shriek that rose to a pitch so high it felt as if needles stabbed her eardrums. She didn't look back. She ran until the moaning and screaming were distant echoes, lost in the labyrinth of corridors. Eventually, Sarah collapsed against a cool, damp wall, panting. Her limbs ached, and her mind buzzed with a cacophony of horror. The faint glow of her flashlight flickered ominously. "Not now," she begged silently, praying the battery would hold out just a bit longer. As she huddled there, she felt a subtle vibration in the stone, a series of pulses, steady like a heart. It's calling me deeper, she realized, the thought both alien and eerily certain in her mind. She remembered how the old legends spoke of an entity that lived within the mountain, something that lured the curious and the desperate. Perhaps she had no choice now but to confront it, to see if there was any way to bargain for her life, to beg for an exit. Clutching her flashlight, she forced herself to her feet. Though every fiber of her being resisted, she followed the pulsing vibrations, letting them guide her through a twisting series of passages. Occasionally, the route branched, and she would pause, placing a hand on the wall to feel which way the pulse was strongest. Before long, she reached a large gateway formed by two colossal pillars of rock. They were carved in swirling patterns, reminiscent of monstrous figures entwined with one another. Past the gateway, the corridor sloped downward steeply, opening into a vast dome-shaped cavern. A foul stench assaulted her nostrils like rotting meat mixed with sulfur. Covering her mouth, she shone the flashlight inside. The walls were covered in pulsating red veins, throbbing in unison with that rhythmic heartbeat. In the center of the chamber loomed a massive, organic structure, a fleshy mass protruding from the ground, roughly spherical with a network of those same red veins running across its surface. It appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting with a sickening squelch. Each expansion sent a ripple of movement through the walls, as if the entire cave was reacting to its presence. Sarah's flashlight beam trembled as she swept it around the chamber. Human remains were scattered near that horrifying sphere bones half buried in the fleshy floor. Tattered clothing, half digested by some corrosive slime, clung to remains of travelers, rangers and perhaps unlucky explorers. The stench was nearly overwhelming. She gagged but didn't vomit, her survival instincts kicking in. She had to find a way past this thing. Maybe there was a passage behind it. Yet as she tried to step forward, the floor pulsed beneath her, causing her to stagger. A shrieking chorus erupted from the walls, dozens of voices, all in agony. It felt like a final warning. She glared at the sphere, rage and terror boiling inside her. You want me to die here? She thought. You feed on us, you living mountain. Her flashlight suddenly flickered, and the chamber grew darker. A wave of fear spiked through her. If the light failed now, she'd be consumed by the darkness, easy prey for whatever was controlling this abomination. In desperation, she reached into her pack and pulled out the last glow sticks. She cracked them all, tossing them around the chamber. Their collective orange glow provided a dim but steadier illumination. Then she took out a pocket knife. It was meager, almost laughable, but it was something. If this monstrous entity was truly alive, maybe it could be hurt. She advanced, knees shaking, stepping over bones and slimy patches of membrane. When she was within arm's reach of the sphere, she could feel its heat. The stench was overpowering, and her ears were bombarded by the wet gurgles and moans emanating from the fleshy mass. Summoning every ounce of courage, she plunged the knife into one of the pulsing veins. The reaction was immediate. The chamber shook violently, and an ear-splitting scream reverberated through the cavern. The sphere writhed, squirting out a dark, viscous fluid that splattered across Sarah's arm, burning like acid. She cried out but twisted the blade deeper. A piercing wail echoed. The entire chamber convulsed, and the fleshy floor seemed to ripple away from her. She yanked the knife free, stumbling backward, her clothes seared by that oozing fluid. For a moment the sphere quivered, its veins flashing between red and an angry purple. The mountain howled through its myriad corridors. Then, with a wet hiss, a tear opened in the chamber wall, revealing a side passage. Sarah gawked at the sudden opening. It was almost as if the mountain was spasming, creating a new tunnel in response to her attack. She didn't hesitate. She ran for it, ignoring the throbbing pain in her burnt arm. As she passed through the opening, she felt the walls constrict behind her, slamming shut. Darkness enveloped her again, but the faint glow of her sticks behind her illuminated the path just enough to see. She followed the new tunnel, heart racing, uncertain if it led to freedom or deeper torment. This tunnel was narrower and seemed more natural, with fewer fleshy veins. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to collapse. At last, she saw a glimmer of something ahead, a faint light. She killed her flashlight to confirm. Yes, there was definitely natural light shining through a small crack in the rock. Hope surged through her. She scrambled forward, climbing a small incline until she reached a thin fissure. Pushing and kicking at loose stones, she managed to enlarge the opening enough to squeeze her body through. She felt a surge of fresh, cool air on her face. Gasping with relief, she emerged onto a narrow ledge outside the mountainside. It was night, the sky strewn with stars. She realized she was high above the forest on a steep cliff. Far below lay treetops swaying in the moonlight. She dropped to her knees, sobbing with gratitude at the sight of the open sky. Behind her, the fissure was already sealing up, as if the mountain were stitching its wound. She listened, heart hammering, as a final faint scream echoed from inside, then silence. Dawn found Sarah half frozen on that ledge. She had dozed intermittently, kept awake by nightmares of living walls and moaning corridors. As the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, she began her careful descent down the cliffside. It took hours, her injured arm throbbing with each movement. Eventually, she found a trail leading toward the base of the Ridgeway range. Stumbling and exhausted, she reached a ranger substation where she collapsed. Her rescue was swift. The alarm had been raised when she failed to return for her scheduled check-in. In the days that followed, Sarah recounted her story to her superiors. They examined her wounds and tested her for exposure to toxic substances. No one believed her outright about the living mountain. Official reports stated that she was trapped by a cave-in, disoriented, and likely hallucinated due to stress, dehydration, and subterranean gases. But Sarah knew the truth. She'd seen the bones of Ranger Barnes, then encountered his twisted simulacrum. She had felt the mountain's pulse cut into its beating heart and heard its shrieks. She still heard them sometimes in the quiet moments just before sleep, a distant echo that refused to fade. Despite her pleas, the higher-ups opted to seal off the newly discovered cave entrances, citing safety concerns. Concrete barriers and warning signs were erected. The public was told that the caves were unstable, prone to collapse, and extremely dangerous. Sarah never returned to the Ridgeway range. She resigned her position as a ranger not long after her ordeal. Some nights, in her small apartment in a distant city, she wakes drenched in sweat, convinced she hears a faint scream or feels the walls around her softly thudding with that otherworldly heartbeat. Word spreads among the locals that if you venture too close to certain parts of that mountain, you can still hear the anguished cries of those trapped inside, forever consumed by the living labyrinth. They say the mountain sometimes opens up, hungry for more wanderers. And though many scoff at the legend, those who have seen Ranger Sarah's hollow eyes or read the frantic scrawl of Edward Barnes's final journal entries are not so quick to dismiss the stories, because the mountain still stands there, silent and immovable, an ancient entity older than memory. It breathes in the darkness, patiently waiting for the next curious soul to step into its gaping maw, lured by strange echoes and the promise of something beyond this world. And once you enter, the mountain's voice, those ghastly screams, will become your own, echoing through stone corridors until the end of time. And if you find yourself hiking near that forbidden range, pause a moment when the wind picks up and listen. You might hear very faintly the distant keening of a lost ranger named Sarah, warning you away. Or perhaps urging you onward, another voice, trapped forever, becoming one with the living mountain.